when we get back together in person, I'm going to be able to say those words that I learned from my rabbi and mentor of blessed memory, Rabbi Mark Shapiro. You may close your books, but for now, I'll just skip that part. As you already know, this past week we celebrated Israel's 73rd birthday, Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, but we also celebrated, or I would say marked, an observance day of another day for Israel known as Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day. And tonight I want to share with you an historical document. I mean, it's not that old. It's only celebrating its B'nai Mitzvah, but a 13-year-old document on this B'nai Mitzvah anniversary of its publication. So I'm going to share my screen. And the name of this document is called Reform Zionism in Search of Clarity. It was an adult study resource guide put out in 2008. And unfortunately, my gallery is now gone and I can't see, but perhaps this was a guide that was studied at Beth Emet 13 years ago. So it was very special to me when I pulled this off the shelf this year as I'm reflecting on Israel and Yom HaAtzmaut to see this guide published by ARTSA, which is the Association of Reformed Zionists of America. And what was so exciting is that when I pulled out to see what was inside and the contents therein, it focused on an open conversation about Reform Zionism. And this open conversation, I'm just going to zoom in on this area here. The next slide, you can see the layout is like a Talmudic page, right? So here's the text in the middle, under where it says Reform and Zionism, and then on the margins are the commentaries all around. So I'm going to zoom in on this open conversation about Reform Zionism, and we'll learn some interesting facts. So what do we see here? That this text created by ARTSA was written by, in the red line, under the red underlining, the central text was written by Rabbi Peter Noble of blessed memory of Beth Emet, the Free Synagogue in Evanston. And at the time, he was chair of the IRZ, which is the Institute for Reform Zionism. And at the same time, he was also president of the CCAR. And there's a disclaimer here that his views are not meant to be as a consensus definition or as the official position of anybody, but rather his personal views, but I think shared by many Reformed Jews at that time and possibly even still today. I would say more probably. So let's dive in and see what some of these statements are. What's interesting is they were written in the form of Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, the Hebrew alphabet 1 through 10, as if they were 10 commandments or 10 views from Rabbi Noble. And we'll just look briefly at an overview of these and then focus on just one. So Aleph, Reform Zionism is inseparable from Reform Judaism. This is a view not always embraced by Reform Jews. Certainly, Reform Judaism at its inception rejected Israel as a nation and we needed this separate land. But in 2008, this statement affirms that our Jewish identity is rooted in the land of Israel. That, number 2, talks about the rebirth of Israel as a modern miracle. We are a modern state which should be guided by compassion and justice, and that is guided by much of the teachings of our biblical prophets. And when we think of Israel as a modern state, we can be wowed by how far Israel has come in its 733 years and how it's at the cutting edge of so many inventions and technology. As we move on then to Gimel, number 3 talks about Aliyah and Aliyah as a mitzvah. And yet Rabbi Noble doesn't expect that all Reformed Jews should live in Israel. We can thrive in our Jewish communities throughout the diaspora. Dalet, number 4. This touches on the concept of spiritual redemption of humankind. and that there's a partnership of Israel and the diaspora to bring about this redemption. And the redemption is ongoing, and it involves mutual support of Israel and the diaspora. It again emphasizes this idea of living our Jewish values similarly to number 2, Bet, and also the following statement, which is in Hey, number 5. Israel must be democratic, pluralistic, and Jewish. We're guided by justice and compassion, and we uphold equal rights for all citizens. And this is a central part of Reform Zionism and central in the efforts that we've put forth with the Israel Religious Action Center, sometimes called IRAC, IRAC. And the work that the Israel Religious Action Center does, not just on behalf of Reform Jews in Israel, but on behalf of all minorities and all who are mistreated. And often the Israel Religious Action Center takes these cases to court. We turn now to Vav, number 6. The mitzvot of Tikkun HaNefesh, repair of the soul, and Tikkun HaOlam, repair of the world, are part of our covenant with Israel. Again, similar to the others, the statement focuses on the Jews in Israel living the values in our Torah and from the prophets. Zion, number 7, focuses on Hebrew as our sacred language and the modern language today of the state of Israel, and how it's essential to learn Hebrew. Chet, number 8. We're going to focus on this one a little bit more closely tonight, but so I'll read it aloud, word for word. For Reform Zionists, Israel's national holidays are sacred. Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day for those who died in defense of Israel, and Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day, should be observed with appropriate prayers and mitzvot in both Israel and the diaspora. Our worship services should contain prayers for the welfare of Israel. And we'll do a deeper dive in just a moment. We'll move on to Tet, number 9, which acknowledges Palestinian people and expresses the idea of an independent state peacefully alongside of Israel. And Yud, number 10, this touches on the concept of Israel's rebirth and the difficult phase that's part of the prayer for Israel, that expression, Reshit Smichat Geulatenu, the beginning of the flowering of our redemption. Now you can see how this would be an adult study course, and we could take any of these 10 and dive in and have a discussion and ask what others' views are. And you could look at the views that were around the page and see with whom you might agree or disagree. Turning now on to number 8. For Reform Zionists, Israel's national holidays are sacred. I just wanted to share with you one of those commentaries, which has been cut out from our page, but I'll share with you. It was written by Jay Dweck, who was on the steering committee for the Institute for Reform Zionism at the time. And he commented on Rabbi Noble's language right here where it says, should be observed, should be observed. And Jay Dweck said, there's a difference between should and must. This must be a requirement. So Jay Dweck is saying that we must have prayers for the welfare of Israel in our worship services. And then turning to Mishkan Tefillah, our newest prayer book that was published in the year 2007, just the year before this was published, we find a liturgy for Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. So full disclosure, for those of you who don't know, Rabbi Noble was chair of the editorial committee for the Mishkan Tefillah. So when we see some similarities, we might not be too surprised. So here is the 2-page spread that begins the liturgy for Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day. And we learn in the footnote at the bottom that the full name of this observance day is Yom HaZikaron LeChayalalei Ma'arachot Yisrael, Remembrance Day for the fallen of Israel's battles. Israel's Memorial Day includes a siren that is sounded at night and again in the morning, which the whole country comes to a stop. The whole country can hear this and stops for this minute of silence and memory. If one were driving in a car, as soon as the siren starts sounding, one would stop one's car and get out and stand at attention in silence until the completion of the siren. And the silence is to remember those who died in defense of Israel. There's another page in this Yom HaZikaron section that includes a special El Malei Rachamim prayer for those who bravely gave their lives for the redemption of the land. This next slide is the beginning of the 2-page spread for the Yom HaAtzmaut liturgy. And what's very interesting is this creative approach. It says in very tiny writing, a 7-branch menorah or 7 candles may be used for this ceremony. And so there's this thought that, of course, the menorah, which is the oldest symbol, going back to the temple that had 7 branches on it. And we even read about a 7-branch candelabra in our Torah, that these 7 lights be lit for 7 different themes. And the themes are, and you might hear similarities to some of these 10 views that Rabbi Noble expressed earlier. The miracle of rebirth, the beauty of the land, the ingathering of the exiles, a just society, the renewal of Jewish learning and language. Remember that was one about Hebrew, hope and peace, and for the courage of Israel's people. It's not too surprising that some of these themes are reflected in that, the text of the Reform Zionism booklet and study, even though that was written a year later. The passages woven in and out of these themes in the Mishkan Tefillah, we were able to see a couple of them. We saw a different one by Hannah Senesh and another by a 13-year-old Israeli, but they include sections from all parts of the Tanakh, all parts of the Bible, from Israel's Declaration of Independence, as there's one right here, from different modern writers, Israeli and otherwise, and also a quote from Theodore Herzl, sometimes called the father of Zionism. Yom HaAtzmaut liturgy includes a prayer for the state of Israel, adapted from the original, and of course, Hatikva, Israel's national anthem. So why share all of this with you tonight? To shine a spotlight on Israel in this week of its 73rd birthday, and to honor the memory and work of our beloved Rabbi Noble, Zichrono Livracha. Rabbi Noble upheld that Reform Zionism is inseparable from Reform Judaism, and he believed that our worship services should contain prayers for the welfare of Israel. And we continue to do that, to come to a Kahal Shabbat morning service, and we have a prayer for Israel every week, as we do for our country. And so I invite us now to join together, even if we're on mute, to this prayer for the state of Israel that was written by Anat Hoffman of the Israel Religious Action Center. Eli, Eli, O God, my God, in this sacred moment, give us hope for Israel and her future. Renew our wonder at the miracle of the Jewish state. In the name of the pioneers who made the deserts bloom, give us the tools to cultivate a diversity of Jewish expression in Israel. In the name of our fallen soldiers, give us courage to stand up to the words and ways of zealots, those in our midst and those among our neighbors. In the name of Israeli inventors who have amazed the world with their innovations, help us apply the same ingenuity in finding a path to peace. In the name of all these women and men, grant us the strength to conquer doubt and despair in Israel, replacing doubt with action, replacing despair with hope. And let us say, Amen.